Fletcher. Now sit back and prepare to be entertained. Welcome to the Dripping Bucket Podcast.
Greetings and welcome to the Dripping Bucket Podcast, where your hosts, Krystle Matar and myself, who am not Rob Hayes' hat, will discuss things and stuff about words, maybe.
Words and like the things that we print that make words that other people can read, I think.
Yeah.
Or they can use them to throw at people for weaponry.
Just as long as you buy them first, then we don't really care what you do with it.
Exactly.
Yeah. So, Krystle, do you want to launch us into whatever the hell we're doing today?
Yeah. So something that we have in common in our reading history is the late great David Gemmell. And I thought we both reread his first book. Was it like a year ago now?
Yeah, that was.
That's rough.
I think it was about a year ago.
It takes us forever to do anything. But yeah, about a year ago, we both reread Legend. And then I bullied you to also buy Legend of the Deathwalker.
Yep. Yeah, I just reread that recently, actually.
You read that one too? Awesome. Okay, so that's perfect. So part of the reason that we did that is because we're going to write heroic fantasy together, but also it's just such an interesting route to the genre generally. Like, he's not quite as well known as the big guys, but also he's very well respected by the folks that have read him. But that book is old. And he shows his wrinkles, that book. So which is kind of our spring off point to talking about writing and how it ages and whether it ages well or not, or if that's even something that we can measure, if it's just totally personal.
Yep. Yeah. So yeah, I just recently reread the second one there.
Yeah. Legend of the Deathwalker.
So there's, I think let's ignore the social norms that have changed since
that's a given.
Late 80s, early 90s. Yeah. You know, there were things in the first book which, you know, the first time I read them, you know, when I was in high school or something, it was a really fucking long time ago.
So back in like the 1900s?
Yeah, somewhere in it actually was in the 1900s. Okay, fuck off. That the second time rereading Legend first, just a year ago, just kind of like stopped me. You know, these sort of like the casual, and she lipped him off, so he smacked her down, and you know, it was like,
and he's the nice guy.
Yeah, and that's the good guy. It's the hero.
Yeah.
So we'll ignore that, and we'll just focus on the prose.
Yeah.
So, and this is sort of like I think I've been rereading a lot of older fantasy and just older books. One of them I grabbed Killing Floor by Lee Child, which is the first Jack Reacher book. Just because it's kind of
throwback.
Famous and huge. So I was like, okay, curious, because I enjoyed at least the first Amazon series. And it's much like Gemmell's stuff.
It's very prompt and somewhat dry, one would even say.
Yep.
And it's it's funny, you know, I don't know what exactly prompted the shift in discussion about prose, but these days we're told so obsessively, show don't tell, what else? All those other stupid rules. And like, oh man, if you want to see what telling looks like, as an example, read fantasy out of, you know, the late 80s and early 90s. And those are like, just, this is what telling looks like. And I'm not necessarily saying it's good or bad or it's prescriptive, but if you can't figure out what people are talking about when they say show don't tell, Legend is a great one.
Yep. And passive writing, heavy into the use of was and had. Like
Yeah.
everything, the door was green, the house was well painted. He was
Yeah.
standing there with his sword. He was doing this, she was doing that. Everything was this, was that. Like
Yeah.
no attempt at sort of like avoiding that at all. It's just
Yeah.
entire pages of
Clearly
people wuzzing things.
not even an industry standard yet that it was. And it makes for an interesting comparison to like how we read now as readers of this era, but also as writers, and how our relationships with prose changes once you absorb a few of those rules. They get really jarring to see on the page.
It fucks with your enjoyment to to read older stuff. I kind of wonder, like, and actually, if folks want to comment on this, that'd be great because I'm genuinely curious. Like, what's it like if you're just a reader? If you go back, do you enjoy a book written in the 80s or early 90s the same, or are you sort of aware of how prose has evolved? Fewer filler words, like he was almost doing this. You got the was and the almost and the hads. Everything is I can't be bothered to actually tell that scene, so I'm just going, oh, he had done that, and I'm gonna leave it at that.
It's almost like stitched in, not even as backstory, but just as like this is important, you should know it, but we're going to move on now. And certainly there's plenty to be said for how effective it is. Like the Legend is a very short book, and it moves along at a fast clip, and it packs a lot into those pages with that ability to just moving on. And I often find myself wondering how much of that is informed by his first career as a journalist, because prose is probably not entirely the focus when you're in journalism, and you need people to know certain things, and then you need to move on because you have a story to tell. But it's interesting to me that you're reading other stuff from the same era and finding the same thing. So clearly this is not something that's unique. It's just something that we've collectively forgotten as readers and writers. And I'm pretty sure it bugs us more than it bugs the
I think I need to go back and try and find some, what would qualify as literary prose, literary fiction from the same era, just as a comparison, because I haven't done that. It's been fantasy, a little bit of science fiction, or
genre.
Like Lee Child's literally his first book. You don't really expect that one to be like a paragon of prose.
I don't think that's his reputation at all. So probably not.
True.
Not his later books either.
Yeah.
But thrillers, they do a job, and they do it very well, and they do it at a fast clip, and certainly prose may be some thriller writers' priority, but it would be an unusual thing rather than the norm. Like I think of what's the Da Vinci Code guy's name? I don't know.
Oh, Dan
Brown.
Yes.
Yeah, and he's so well known for how gripping those novels are. Like he has mastered the ability to make you compulsively read the next chapter even though you don't want to. you're ready to put the book down, you want to move on with your life or go to bed or something, but he ends that last page in such a way where it's like, oh, you bastard. And then you keep going. And so prose is not a focus, but his books sell, so maybe we're too precious.
I wonder about that a lot. Like my suspicion is most readers don't care nearly as much about it as I do, which is probably for the best. I don't think that's it's entertainment, so kind of who cares? While at the same time I do deeply.
Yeah, exactly.
No one else kind of really needs to.
Who spends more time with these words than us?
Yeah.
So like, we almost have to care in order to keep the sanity and keep the thing rolling. Or maybe we're doing it wrong. Maybe the way they keep sanity is by not caring. I don't know. I like it this way though.
Yeah, It keeps us entertained. So, I think something that the way prose that discussion, the way prose has evolved or is changing, ties in with sort of how you tell a story, not just sort of the words you choose, but like point of view, POV
Yeah,
characters.
the focus.
Like a lot of the older stuff, I'm seeing
A
either
lot
just
of head
omniscient
hopping. Yeah.
POV, which has sort of largely fallen out of favor if you're not Dirk Ashton and doing it incredibly well.
Yeah.
And also, I guess what I'd call like a loosey goosey third, where it's like it's
Yeah.
only one main character and it's told in a third person POV, but
Mostly from
there's
his
all this
perspective.
dipping into what other
Yeah.
people are sort of doing and describing themselves in ways that a person never would.
Well,
It's
and
like,
also just like I flagged it a few times as a beta reader where it's like, this is a POV slip. There's no way for this person to know that.
yeah,
And so it's like constant and purposeful POV slips. And see, I haven't read Legend of the Deathwalker as recently as you have, but I know his later stuff, he still did that omnipresent. He will jump into the character that best serves the scene, kind of irregardless of if you've ever heard of this character or not. And then he does this great thing where half the time he kills that character. So you're like, what? No, I really liked this guy for the last 6 pages. But I would be interested to know, since you read them most recently back to back, if you found that he got more effective at it, and more purposeful, maybe is the word.
I would say yes. Like I
Yeah.
definitely found the second one was a better written book.
Yeah. Quite a few
years
years between them.
Yeah.
As well.
Yeah. But it was still, I still found the POV stuff a little jarring.
Yeah.
And not because it was done badly, but just purely due to, having mostly read extremely modern stuff for the last, 10 or 15 years. Like once you're sort of a writer, you're mostly reading what other writers are publishing, like at that time.
Yeah.
Aside from Anna Smith Spark and yourself and maybe one or two other writers, I don't really read any book twos anymore. I kind of read book one of everything that comes out, but I don't have time to
see where
finish
they're at.
Trilogies or series because, I don't read that much anymore.
Yeah, it's funny. We get into this gig because we love reading and we love stories so much that we want to tell them, and then we no longer have time to engage with anybody else's story because we become by purpose obsessed with our own stories, and that's the only way they get done is if we're a little bit obsessed.
Yep. And you find getting into like writer editor headspace, you try and pick up a book, for pleasure reading, after, spending a day editing your own shit. And you're like, no, bad sentence, bad. No. Okay. You should have moved that word over there. And I'll be trying to read like a perfectly good book, but I'm editing it as I go. Like I can't. So I think some people can turn that off, but it drives me nuts. I can't do it.
I can't. And I've always been somewhat of a picky reader, but like since I've started self-editing so much, it's like I can't. And it's almost like a skill of the other writer that they're able to craft their stories in such a way that I no longer notice.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
It's gotta be someone who writes really differently than I do.
Yeah. Yeah, same. Because it's like if there's any overlap there, I can't turn off that's not how I do it. Even though I'm fully aware that me doing it a certain way is not the same as being quality, but I can't make it stop.
Yeah. So I think that kind of leads us to something else I was thinking about recently. So we've talked about evolving prose, evolving POV, evolving storytelling, or changing at least. where would you see it? Where do you see it sort of going next? Are we going to do the circle thing and Omniscient's going to make a big comeback, or are people going to get tired of like, oh, this prose is too tight, too snappy? I want something with a little more flair and, you know, just a hint of purple.
I think it's kind of, we're trending less trends in the indie spaces, if that makes sense. Because there is no one or no few gatekeepers saying this is the way it must be done, and no few editors that say this is the way our publishing house works. And so those of us in the indie spaces kind of vibe whatever they want. If they want to bring back Omniscient like Dirk does, they do it. If they want to do purple, you know, they do it, and they find an audience for it. And so, at least speaking from an indie perspective, it feels like those trends are kind of blown wide open, and everybody just kind of gets to vibe their own way. And so the reader has a wider experience. And I think that's why, as indie publishers, once we get readers, I notice we tend to keep them. Like, once somebody goes indie, they kind of fall farther and farther into indie. Yeah. And I think it's because of the variety that transcends trend. And certainly there are still trendy pieces that rise to the top and hit buzz at the right time, and Godspeed to them, they're doing great. But, you know, there's still us grimdark kids chugging along when cozy is trendy. You know what I mean? And I think the same is to be said for prose, where some folks are nailing purple prose in a way that has readers like slathering at the mouth for more. And then there's you, who is pretty sparse, but artistically so. Like, it's not lacking, it's just straightforward in a way that I suspect you make it look easy, because we're reading your finished work, but I'm willing to bet it's really fucking hard to nail it in such a way that it feels complete. And then there's everything in between. So I think this, just by nature of the space we're in, we're not going to be able to track specific trends.
Yeah.
And that's why I like it here.
Yeah.
You know?
I think there's probably a whole separate conversation about the indie scene.
Yeah.
You know, with the prices of literally everything rising except for indie books.
Yeah.
It's kind of it's a good space for fantasy fans who are broke.
Yeah.
Which is, I mean, let's be honest, most of us.
Yeah, most of us are.
You know, like I think I'm still selling ebooks for the same price I did in 2016 when I published my first one. Yep.
That tracks. Because it hasn't risen over $5 at least as long as I've been in the scene. And though I've only published in 2021, I was in this space as far back as like 2018, maybe a little earlier. So yeah, I haven't seen a change in ebooks. And then there's always KU, you know, so the voracious readers can really chew through a lot of books that way.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. You got anything sort of in this space, anything kind of related that you've been thinking about lately?
Well, I think it does speak, though, to the timelessness of storytelling, which kind of, you know, pivots into why we chose Gemmell specifically. Because for all that we are griping about, you know, his really old prose, he grew as a writer in such a way that made him such a cornerstone in heroic fantasy specifically, that it's inspired both of us to chase that feeling. So for all that we worry about prose, I think in a way the ability to tell a story becomes more than just the prose. It speaks to something really human, and stays with us for a really long time, which I think is really cool. And also gives me that piece of sanity that is, even if I'm going to go down a rabbit hole into destroying every was statement in my 300,000 word novel. I'm doing it because I care, and I'm doing it for the hope that I make something memorable, and that gift of being allowed to be memorable and to be remembered is so cool.
Yeah. I mean, you said it exactly right. Like, even though I kind of grumbled as I read Legend,
Yeah,
the reality is that book had a massive impact on me when I read it. Like decades, so many fucking decades later, I still love the first reading of that book. I still love it. I remember how it kind of shaped a young Mike. There were moments that got me in trouble where it was like, you can't walk away from this situation because that's not what you do. You stand up for that person and you go get your ass kicked. It's like, because turns out I'm not Druss.
Turns out. but yeah, I mean, the same. It's like even reading it now, and the prose is clunky and it's underdeveloped and it hasn't been fleshed out. But man, that concept of just standing even though you're gonna lose, but it's right. That informs so much of my storytelling as well. And I'm gonna say Legend of the Deathwalker more so because I think I read that one before I read Legend.
Right.
And specifically that one is one of my favorite of the Druss-focused novels because it feels so hopeless through that entire book. But Druss never questions it. And he's not a shiny hero in that he is right. In fact, he often knows that he probably might not be right. But it's in such a way that it's just so honest and earnest and aspirational a little bit. Like I wish that I was that sure in myself. And I wish there were more stories focusing on kind of impossible things to untangle, because things not being clear is so much more relatable.
Mm-hmm. Which I think does two things. Brings us to what we're going to talk about in the next episode, which is, or part of it, is there any place for heroic fantasy in the modern era where people are, like, ooh, morally gray?
Although morally gray, no, maybe that's a whole other episode. Okay, never mind.
Yeah. And there was another thing, but I just gapped out. I got distracted
by me saying words. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, whatever. Hardly matters. But we're at a lovely place to end.
Yeah.
Join us next week or tomorrow or Wednesday or some other day.
Or just keep binging through this.
Yeah.
This
and we will talk about our own heroic fantasy project and
as inspired by David Gemmell.
Yeah.
There you go.
All right.
Good sign off.